welcome to Connected Conversations for Creatives, a place where creatives like you can learn, grow, and connect. I'm your host, Jennifer Carr. In our digital age, the lifespan of online content seems to shrink with each passing day. For authors, podcasters, bloggers, and speakers, this presents a very specific challenge. How do you keep your work alive and kicking in a world that is constantly chasing the next big thing? Evergreen content, material that remains relevant regardless of the date it was created, it often loses visibility as it gets buried under the avalanche of new posts on social media and blogs. So let's consider this. What if the traditional platforms and strategies we rely on are actually not designed to showcase the timeless nature of our work? It turns out that most social media channels and email marketing are inherently flawed for promoting content that is not brand new. They are chronological, showing the latest posts first, which means that your brilliant podcast episode or your insightful blog post from last year is unlikely to be seen by someone who could really benefit from it today. So how can creative minds like yourself harness the power of your evergreen content and ensure it reaches the right audience at the right time? So just imagine the possibilities. If your content could find its audience, not just by topic, but also by when and where it's most relevant, To explore this topic with us, we have Mark Herschberg joining us today. Mark is not just an author, but a visionary who saw this challenge and responded by creating innovative solutions. After realizing the limitations of traditional platforms and promoting his book, he ventured beyond and developed an app designed to enhance how we use micro-content. His strategies help make evergreen content accessible and relevant geotemporally, meaning right where and when the audience needs it. Mark's insights are invaluable for anyone looking to make a lasting impact with their content, so stay tuned as we learn more about maximizing our creative outputs through smarter and more targeted strategies. Mark, welcome and thank you for being here today. I am definitely intrigued by this concept because you're right. Even with the additions of things like Facebook Memories where you can reshare your old content, it's just not conducive to getting the right eyes on it. So I'm so glad you're here.
Well, thank you for having me. It is my pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Now, before we jump into that deep end, let's just kind of start quick and easy. Tell us about yourself and how you found yourself in the space of social media and marketing.
I got here through a very circuitous route. I went to MIT as an undergrad and grad student back in the 90s. I am a classic nerd. I am a techie. I graduated during the dot-com era and began my career as a software engineer. That's my career path. That's my day job. I build tech startups. And I knew early on that I wanted to become a CTO, a chief technology officer. What I quickly realized was that to be a CTO, it wasn't just about being the best engineer. Sure, I needed to be good at that. But there were all these other skills: leadership, networking, negotiating, team building, communications, all these other skills. No one taught me. So I said, okay, I need to continue to grow my tech skills, but I have to learn this other stuff. And I set out to do that. We didn't have wonderful podcasts to help give us insights back then. This was the 90s. Yep. So I was really on my own. There were books, and that was about it. I began to develop these skills myself. I quickly realized these skills apply not just to senior executives, but everyone at all levels, as well as for many solopreneurs too. These are universal skills. So I began to upskill my team as well. And as I was doing this, MIT got feedback. Companies who would hire our students said, by the way, there are these skills we want to see, not just in recent college grads, not just engineers, not just your students. Everyone we hire, we want these skills and we can't find them. So I was along my path to becoming a CTO, but I heard MIT was trying to build out these skills. I reached out, I said, listen, I've got some training material, because again, no great podcasts. Here's some training content. Hopefully this helps. I thought that would be it, one and done. But instead, MIT said, wait a second, hold on, don't go away. Help us build out more. Okay, sure, happy to help out. Said, nope, you still can't leave. We'd like you to help co-teach. We have great professors, but we realize we want practitioners like you as well. And that pulled me in for now over 20 years. In addition to my core career, building tech startups, I've been teaching these skills at MIT and sometimes elsewhere. That led to the book. Now, this was also unexpected. I said, our students, because they are It's a hands-on class. It's not us lecturing at them. They're trying. They're not taking a lot of notes. And I know it goes in one ear, out the other. Go, this is great. And then they forget. So I said, well, maybe we could write up some notes for them because I hadn't come up with the brain bump idea yet that we're going to talk about later. I said, okay, well, let's just write up notes. And I thought I was going to write up 10, 20 pages of notes as a summary of the class for the students. Well, 20 pages became 40, 80, 100 plus. I said, I think this might be a book. I reached out to Dory Clark, who is a fantastic author and an expert on how to be an expert. She gave me some advice. I said, all right, I'm writing a book now. And I turned into a book, The Career Toolkit. I do speaking on it as well. But I recognize that same problem that we're going to talk about, which is you read a book, it's in one ear, out the other, or maybe one eye, out the other for reading, and said, we still need to do more. And fortunately, some of my jobs have been I do cybersecurity, I've tracked terrorists and criminals on the dark web, but I've also done content marketing, lead generation, advertising, and I saw this overlap between education and some of the other tools I had done. So I know that's a lot. It's how I took these two careers that went in different directions and then merged them together to bring us here today.
I love that. I love when one thing just kind of bleeds over into another and you're like, wow, I didn't know this about myself. And now, you have this passion that just kind of unfolded and you were just like, what a surprise. I love when passion surprised you like that.
I'm a big believer that we need to look outside our expertise. For example, I used to read accounting books, not because I find accounting super exciting, but if I could understand basic accounting, I will be more effective when I speak to accountants or when I try to run a business. Creativity was not my strength. I was that nerdy engineer. Let me just build it. You figure out how to make it look pretty. But I would start to pay attention, understand how do you think about it and why. Even doing things like reading up, I watch probably more TV than I should. And I would go to the articles that would summarize the episodes and give their insights because they would see things I don't. And by doing this over and over, I'd start to say, okay, now I can start to learn how they think about it. I can start to see some of those insights. So by exploring to areas that aren't our core domain, which we do need to improve in, we can continue to improve how we think and our capabilities. So stretch yourself in new directions.
I like that. And I want to say out loud for anyone listening, just because you don't think you're creative, the whole definition of creativity is finding solutions to problems that maybe somebody else hasn't found. So, just because and people do discredit engineers. And listen, I married one, and he is one of the most creative people that I know. And it's a very different kind of creativity than what I have. So we all have this underlying level of creativity. We just have to figure out how to feed it. And I think you're exactly right. Like, find what interests you and build on that. And then don't be afraid to expand, because you never know what's going to be that catalyst to just kind of spark that fire into something more.
As engineers, when you actually look at some of the assessments of engineers, creativity is important, but it's a certain type of creativity. Yes. Because we have to say, well, here's your problem. How do we fit 10 pounds of something in a 5-pound sack? That's what we're used to doing. We're not used to doing, how do I create really compelling characters and create drama between them? We're not trained to do that. So different types of creativity, and it comes in many flavors, as you noted. But even then, I think we need to explore these different types. So if you're great at creating those characters, try to come up with some of those engineering creativity problems to just stretch yourself in new directions.
Oh, absolutely. And that's also where collaboration comes into play, and finding creatives of a different sort. I will tell you that some of my best ideas come from me using my engineer husband as a sounding board to say, hey, what about this? And he's like, but have you considered this? And I'm like, I haven't, and I never would have. So finding that collaboration partner or group of people that you can work with, like I've seen a group of engineers work together. That is an interesting thing. But you add an artist in there with them, and all of a sudden you've got a masterpiece. And so collaboration can also be a huge part of that as well.
One way I've been stretching myself the last few years, I started to do stand-up comedy. Now, I'm an accomplished public speaker, professional speaker. It turns out comedy is very different. Stand-up comedy is very different from traditional public speaking, because in public speaking, we tell you, know your content, know what you're going to say. Do not memorize it. It needs to feel natural and in the moment. But comedy is the exact opposite. You need to have it down word for word. You need to know exactly where to put the pause, exactly where to emphasize this syllable. And I've been fortunate that there's a group of comedians, some professional, some amateur, who I've done this with. And we'll sit around and we'll refine each other's jokes. And it's really stretched me in a completely different direction I didn't even know I was lacking in until I started to try it. So it's always pushing yourself.
I love that. Oh, that's fun. Okay, so let's go back to talking about the book you wrote, because you are a creative and you wrote a book because you saw a problem and you provided a solution and you wanted to market your book. So what were you doing to begin with to market that book?
I thought I'd have a better marketing platform than I did. Now, I did not have many followers on social media. I had my personal Facebook page. I'm going to set this up so you don't feel like, oh, well, I'm starting from nothing. I started from nothing. I had Facebook with friends. I had LinkedIn with professional connections. That may have been around 2,000 people because I am well connected. But a friend pointed out, most of my connections were tech people, many of whom would actually say, oh, I don't need this stuff. I just need to do the math. So my connections were not oriented to my target market.
Ooh.
I had no other social media, no Twitter, no Instagram. I still do not use Facebook for reasons unrelated to this. So I was starting from nothing. I thought, well, I have a few connections, certainly to MIT, and that gave me some credibility. But maybe I could leverage that to sell the books into other schools. Maybe I could leverage, I have connections to these online engineering communities. Oh, and they promote books. That got me nowhere. So it really was a cold start. And I went out and just said, I am going to put myself out there. Dory Clark, who I mentioned earlier, said for her next book, she was going to go on 150 podcasts. Okay, that's the plan. Now we can talk about, I'm not sure that is the right approach. We can talk about what I've learned from doing it. My friend Robin Colucci, and she's someone who helps experts write books. She said to me, look, when you do a book, plan for 5 years. It's 1 year of I'm creating the book. 1 year if you go traditional publishing of they've got it, they're finalizing it, working on the cover, your marketing plan. So 2 years in, you've now launched. And now here's the key thing. There's 3 years to go. Most authors, when they get the book in their hands, they feel that sense of elation. Yes, I finally did. I felt nothing. Because I knew at this point, after all that work and finally the book is printed, I'm at the start of the race. Because now is the 3 years of running the race. Now is the 3 years of going out and marketing it and getting the word out and grinding every day. That's the real work. Your writing, that was the training. That was the prep to run the marketing race. And so you've got the 2 years and then 3 years of marketing minimum.
That's exhausting. And you're right. Like and when you if you can get a traditional publisher behind you, you do have a little bit of an advantage because they do have a bigger platform that you can use. But when you are independent, when you are self-published, oh my stars, because you start looking for, okay, what are the trends? I don't know what trends are. I don't know how to find the trends that I'm supposed to be following. And then, I don't want to look like this person. It's overwhelming. And so I am in year 2.5 of my first book. And yeah, like I'm just now seeing good traction from all of the effort that I put in before I published, when I published, and now after I published. And so yeah, like it's a marathon. And so don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
And don't lament if you're self-publishing and thinking, oh, I did miss out on those traditional publishers. Now, they can be helpful.
Sure.
My friend Valerie Friedland has a wonderful book called Like Literally Dude. It came out through a traditional publisher. They gave her a lot of support. They did get her on some top shows. She was not a celebrity. Celebrities obviously are going to put a lot of work behind. But there was another friend of mine. I'm not going to give her name. She had a book, first book sold well over 100,000 copies.
Wow.
So publisher is very happy with her. They know they have good content here. Her second book came out, and it came out, I'll just say, at a really bad time. And so that launch just did not work. It did not gain traction. Not a reflection on the book. The news cycle, there was some major stuff going on. So no room for her content, and it flopped. To this date, it's only sold a few thousand copies.
Mm.
And what I've heard from traditional publishers, now again, if you're a celebrity, fantastic, you're set, they'll be behind you. For everyone else, they'll say, yeah, great, we're really here for you. And they'll be supportive and friendly. And in the run up to the launch, of course, they're doing things to promote you. Now, how much depends on just how much they believe in you. It might be a little help, it might be significant help. And then that you've got your pre-sales the day you launch. You've got the first week or two, they're looking at the numbers. And if your numbers are great, they say, fantastic, we can put more money, time, effort behind you because that generates revenue. But if not, they walk away and say, well, we've got other books. Best of luck. Keep promoting it because we want to see more revenue. But that's it. And I know so many people who got a tiny, tiny amount of help from traditional publishers. It is on you, even if you have a traditional publisher. And if you don't, you're probably not missing out on much.
I could not agree more. Like, that is one of those things that, starting out, I thought that was the only way to go, right? I wrote a book and I thought, okay, somebody has to do something with it. And I will just tell you that I cannot imagine going traditional. Would I love somebody else to run the marketing side of my stuff? Absolutely. But you know what? There's professionals out there who do that already, and I don't have to go to a traditional publisher. The work is still mine. I have total control. I get final say. So yeah, like I don't, it would have to take a big, probably an act of God to make me go traditional at this point, only because I love how comfortable I am in learning the process. Now, it's probably not for a person who's not self-motivated. There is some self-motivation involved when it comes to publishing for yourself. So you do have to be willing to put in the extra work because it's a lot.
You go further and say publishers are becoming an anachronism.
Mm.
For nonfiction, fiction's a little different, but we can even talk that's changing too. But let's take a nonfiction author like myself. I wrote a business book. The reality is your incentives and their incentives are not aligned.
That's true.
Most business book authors, and realistically most authors, but let's just stick to that nonfiction world, and particularly business self-help, you do not make money through books. If you are successful, 10,000 books, that's a success.
Yeah.
But my rule of thumb for how much you will make in terms of your, blanking on the word, I want to say commission.
Your royalties?
Royalties, thank you.
Yes,
That
yes.
word eluded me. Rule of thumb, you're going to make about $1 per book in royalties.
Mm-hmm.
Say, wait a second. And that, of course, is against your advance. 10,000 books? That's $10,000. Even if you say 20 or 30,000, we're talking lifetime now. I'm not going to say no to $20,000, $30,000, but that's not life changing. That doesn't even cover your expenses for a year.
That's right.
So your book money is not how you're making money. For most, again, nonfiction, self-help business writers, it is through coaching, speaking, or other services. And the book, unfortunately, is really being used more as marketing material. For the record, while I do some corporate speaking, I do not coach, I do not have other services. I wrote this as a passion project to help people. But what this means is your publisher is very interested in selling copies because they're making $5, $8 per book on their margins. They go, great, 10,000 books, $80,000, great, chalk it up on our ledger. But you're saying that is not all I need. I need to use the book to get me other clients. And your publisher doesn't care. They only care about book sales. So you have a misalignment. And by the way, I'd go further. Authors Guild, of which I'm a member, well, they care about helping me with my book. But again, many authors, well, we have other things. National Speakers Association, they care about your speaking. But many speakers, it's not just speaking. In fact, most speakers, I believe, don't make their money primarily through speaking. When we look at podcasting groups, We don't yet have like a national podcasters association, but podcasting community, same thing. You're not making a lot of money, maybe a sponsorship. We need to recognize there is a convergence across all these channels, and they need to holistically be approached by a creative and her marketing team to create success. And the existing structures, unfortunately, have blinders on and only stick to their lanes. I'll jump off my soapbox now.
No, I'm here for it. I'm like, yeah, let's go. Like, no, that you are exactly right. But we can go back to talking about you marketing your books. At what point did you realize that maybe traditional methods were not effective, and kind of like you realize there's a big blank space when it comes to marketing my work, and how did you fill it?
And I'll note that, again, I might be slightly different because I am not building up my email list
Right.
so I can sell you a $5,000 service package. And I know I'm not going to get rich off the book, but when I just focused on book sales, because I do want to move books, I always said from the start, I'd rather 1 million people read my book and I don't make money than the reverse. But does not mean I want stolen and put out for free. I do want respect for the IP. But it's about getting to the hands of people. And so how do I get the word out? And I built up my social media, but again, I'm starting effectively from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
I was going on these podcasts, and each podcast, the reality is on a given podcast, I would typically sell single digits, some of the larger ones, maybe double digits, but that's it. And when you do the math and you say the time to find the podcast, pitch them, coordinate, get on it, and then even with the more than $1 a book I make, because I self-published, it's still less than minimum wage.
Yes.
The financial incentive isn't there. And I know with podcasts and with social media, it's that you're competing in a noisy channel. When you listen to a podcast, again, I'm going to a business self-help type podcast. Oh, we have this week an expert. He's talking about this, and here's his book. And the audience knows next week there will be another expert with another book on a relevant topic. There's another bus coming. I don't have to jump on this one. Yeah. And so I just said, these channels aren't working. We know we need word of mouth marketing. That is the way. That's the groundswell we all dream about. But word of mouth marketing doesn't work when people forget your book. And I know from teaching students, they forget it as soon as they're done.
Immediately, yep.
I know from the books I've read, I go, wow, what a great book. 2 weeks later, I forgot it. Mm-hmm. This podcast episode you're listening to, like all your other episodes, there's such great advice. Mm-hmm. But you, the listener, you're probably driving to work, you're on the treadmill in the gym, you're out for a run, you're cooking dinner, you're listening to this in the background. And as soon as this is over, you're on to other tasks. Mm-hmm. You're not going to act on the information here. Hopefully you'll remember 1 or 2 things, but that's going to fade in a day or two. Boy, that is not effective marketing.
Nope.
It's also not effective for your time because you just put in an hour or so listening, and what do you retain from that? So there's an inherent problem here.
Well, first of all, thank you for making my show now obsolete. No, I'm just kidding. But you're right, because I can read a book and I can feel so good about it and be like, oh, that was a great book. And then I couldn't even tell you exactly who the main characters were the next day because, I was reading with a vibe. I was feeling the book, I wasn't really thinking or concentrating on it. And then my to-do list is ever long. So yeah, that's exactly how it goes for just about anything these days because we have so much going on and we're so easily distracted, our technology in our hand all the time and that kind of thing, which I'm guilty and I love it and it is what it is. So, how do we make our stuff memorable? How do we get our stuff constantly in front of people? And I think that might go back to the evergreen content that I mentioned earlier. Like, what does that look like maybe for an author?
It does. Now, I'm going to start by talking about nonfiction. Again, a lot of business and self-help, but even broader education and learning. We can talk about fiction, which will be slightly different in how we approach it. So for this type of nonfiction, we know to remember something, we need to use spaced repetition is the best proven method. Spaced repetition is a fancy name for look at the thing again. And it's why when we had tests in school, we would read the chapter again, we'd look over our notes, we'd make flashcards and practice through them. We did that because there was a test. There was clear incentive. But as adults, we don't make notes on the books we read or the podcasts we hear. We don't create flashcards. We don't go through it. And that's why I quickly forget. Now, that's a lot of work. There are flashcard apps out there. Now, there are some that are focused on, let's say, SATs. There are also some that let you create your own flashcards. But that's a lot of work. Who wants to create their own flashcards? The other thing is, who wants to actually open an app every day? Oh my God, that's a lot of effort. Again, if you have that test, you've got the LSATs coming up, sure, you'll do it. You're not going to do it as an adult. Sure. So the key is we needed to get spaced repetition, and we needed to do it in a low-cost way. And by cost, now the app is free, this is all free, but cost meaning time or effort. Mm-hmm. And that's where I came up with Brain Bump. And the real key was recognizing from my days at content marketing that because authors are not making their money selling books, the reality is these nonfiction authors, they would stand on a street corner and hand out their book to everyone because it leads to these other services that help them make money. But you look cheap if you're standing on a street corner saying, please, you take my book. So how can we get them to give out that content and stay top of mind? And so we combine these two into my app is Brain Bump. And this is one way to do it. And again, it's a free app, but we can talk about other ways you can do it not using the app. So we need to repeatedly get the information in front of the audience. Here's how Brain Bump works. We take the key ideas from books, blogs, podcasts, classes, talks. Again, these are just different mediums for your information, for your creative content. We take those key ideas and put them onto the server. So imagine in a book, if you went through and highlighted certain things, usually about 1 to 4 sentences in length. Oh, here's a good point. Here's what I want to remember. That goes onto the server. The app user, you get the app free from the app stores. You download the app for free. You say, here's a book I'm reading. Here's a podcast I'm hearing. Here's a podcast I'm not listening to, but it looks interesting. Let me just check it out. And what you're downloading are those key tips. So you get these tip cards. So it looks a little like a flashcard app and they have cards, but it's not Q&A. Everything is tagged by topic. Think hashtags on social media. And this is the key to what you were talking about, because now you have all these tips, all organized not by time, but by topic. And this allows 2 usage modes. The first is just-in-time access. So for example, in my book, there's a chapter on networking. Where do you read it? Sitting at home. Where do you need it? 2 months later at a conference. So imagine you're walking into the hotel. I wish I had those networking tips. Pull out your phone, open the app, tap networking as the topic. There's all the networking tips, exactly what you need from my book, from someone else's book, from a podcast. You can create your favorites list. So you say, these are the ones I want to remember. They're right there, and you pull them up in seconds. Nice. The second usage mode is this, I consider like a daily affirmation. And this is that spaced repetition. I'm a new manager. I'm reading a management book. Every day at 9 a.m., I want to get a management reminder. So it pops up on my phone. I don't even open the app. I just get a little notification. Here's the advice. Oh, good advice. Swipe, done. Once a week, I've got a strategy meeting at 3 o'clock Wednesday. So at 2:55 every Wednesday, I get a tip for strategy. And then I'm a new parent, so I need parenting tips. And at 6 o'clock, right as I go home, I want to get that parenting tip. Now, here's the important thing, what you were saying before about that geotemporal connection. If I got the parenting tip at 11 a.m. that morning, my brain would say, okay, great advice, but I've got 3 meetings and 100 emails between now and when I need it. Don't confuse me. And it disappears. So by delivering the right information in the right time and place, it stays sticky. The brand, the book, the author, the source stays top of mind. And now you're going to get that word of mouth marketing.
I really like this. And I'm sitting here and my wheels are spinning and I'm thinking, okay, I can see how I could utilize this, but first let me ask, is the user providing, like, say I read this book and I'm providing it to the app, or is there like already a library that I'm choosing from?
Great question. We mentioned most people don't want to go through the effort of creating flashcards,
Right.
and we respect IP. There are book summary apps out there.
Hmm.
We're different from them. Book summary apps will take your book, they'll summarize it without your permission. I hear they often get it wrong, and then they'll charge people for it. We respect your IP, so we will never put your content in there, but you can say, I want my content in there. So you, the content creator,
Okay.
author, podcaster, speaker, you say, here are my tips. I'm deciding what is on brand for me. I'm putting it on the server. I'm even telling you what those hashtags are, because this is what's on brand for me. It goes with whatever else. You might just have words like leadership, management, networking, or maybe you have words like feeling good, living good, eating good, because your brand is how to
Hmm.
be good. Okay, great. Use what works with your brand. So you, the content creator, put it on the server, and then the app users, when they download the app, they see the library that has your book, my book, her book. But if you're an app user, because we don't yet have all books and all podcasts, all other sources, you, the app user, can add your own just for you. So if there's a source we don't have, you can add it one by one. We already have implemented, if you do Kindle highlights, we can import that Kindle highlights file to turn it into cards, and we'll be doing other integrations in the future.
I love it. So, because what I'm thinking is, it's so hard to come up with marketing or just even content ideas like to use other than creating teasers of the videos, but having other methods of content that I can throw out there and say, hey, if you're looking for information on, XYZ, I have a podcast episode, and then that's already going to have all of the hashtags involved. I can just go find the one tip that I'm looking for that I put on a graphic and then I share it. Like, I'm thinking this is a fantastic way to create that content with content I've already created.
You exactly can take your existing content. You don't need to create new
Mhm.
content. For a book, what we find, it's typically about 2 hours of effort for an author or her VA, or we have people on Upwork who can do it for you. Usually, at the time of this recording in 2024, they're usually charging around $40, one time fee. They know how to set this up. So they'll go through your book, pull out the tips. And by the way, if you've got a Kindle version, you can do the same thing that you go through, you highlight in Kindle. So you're skimming through your book, going this,
Mhm.
export those to a CSV file. You're now 90% of the way there. Now, you are doing some upfront work, but then you're done because once you put these tips in, it gets recycled over and over to audiences who want your content now. Unlike social media, you don't have to go back every week and say, oh, I haven't posted. What do I come up with? It's also, though, that's for a book. For a podcast or a blog, you might be doing this already. Every time I have a blog post, let me pull out, here's a quote. Takes
Mhm.
me about 15 seconds to add it. And you can put it all in a spreadsheet, so we make it very easy, or you can use the interface. For a podcast, you're probably already doing this because in your show notes, you might have, here's the quote. You might pull out that audio clip. You can just repurpose that already into this app. So you've got your existing content. Here's two other great things you can do with this. If you haven't done this, well, let's say you take your book and you've now created this spreadsheet and you've got 100 tips that are going into the app. Well, now you've got 100 social media posts. You've got organized. Here are the posts.
Yep.
Here's the topic. I know what hashtag to use. So those 2 hours of work you did up front, great. You've just made the next year, 2 years easier. We make it even easier. We have this wonderful social share method. We know people like to share quotes. If you're lucky, they will actually put your name next to your quote, but don't hold your breath. But on the Brain Bump app, there is a share button on every tip. And when they hit the share button, they get this nice interface that says, okay, here's the tip. Here's a little tip card. choose the layout. Do you want square? Do you want landscape? Do you want portrait? And we have them preset for different popular social media channels. What's the font color? What's the font size? What's the background color? And they can change it up to make it look pretty. But the whole time it has your book cover, your podcast cover, your branding is always going to be shown. So when they share it, they will share your quote with your name, your title, your cover. And if the content creator has given us her social media handle, we can now have the person sharing tag you. So as she shares your quote with her friends, you get tagged and you're part of the conversation.
Okay, so as a fiction author, like you can do any book, right? You can upload any book to this library, not just nonfiction. Yeah. So as a fiction author, we really like to share quotes and excerpts from our books because, that's what draws people in. They get a peek at the story. And so I'm sitting here thinking, like, how much easier is that I just go through one time and I don't have to go looking for quotes in my book to be like, hey, this is a good spot to share. It's already there. And then everybody else can share it as well. And I'm already credited with it. So yes, I like this a lot. I'm really excited if you can't tell.
What's great is that if you are working on your social media, there's the 60-30-10 rule that someone told me. I'm not a social media expert. 60-30-10 rule says 60% of the time it's your content. Here's a podcast I was on. Here's a quote from my book. Here's something. 10% can be selling. Buy my new book, buy my service. That can be pure promotion sales. But 30%, to be a good social media citizen, you should be sharing relevant from other people. Here's an article I read that's relevant to my audience. Here's a great quote from another author. What's great about this app is not only can I say, oh, I haven't shared something lately. Let me go to my book. Okay, here's that quote. But I need to share something from someone else. What topic do I want to share on? Find that topic. Here's a whole bunch of quotes from a whole bunch of people. Pick one, share it. And this takes seconds. You can literally do this in under 10 seconds. Share some relevant topic from some other content creator that's relevant for your audience. And of course, tag the other person so they know and they'll hopefully do the same.
No, I love that. That's fantastic. Do you see any kind of emerging trends or technologies that you think are really going to impact this, make it easier even?
It comes down to the cell phone. Because here's what changed the game. I mentioned you read my tips, you read those networking tips, sitting at home with the book. You need them 2 months later. You're not carrying my book with you. And that was the disconnect. You learned it in class. You learned it online. You learned it in a book, but you don't have it when and where you need it. Now, in theory, so it's on the cell phone and I have all my notes. They're in my Google Drive on my cell phone. Here's the key point. It is the retrieval time. This goes to that cost we're talking about, not financial. We know, for example, that if a web page takes longer than 3 or 4 seconds, you start to lose people. Longer than 7 seconds, they just give up on the website.
Mm-hmm.
You're losing sales. You're losing engagement. Making fast retrieval matters. If we're having a conversation, I say, wait, there was a really good point. Let me pull it up. If I have to spend 20, 30 seconds trying to pull it up, no, that's too long. So our rule of thumb, it should be no more than 7 seconds. We try to do less. It really just depends on the action. We try to minimize the time and button clicks. And so by having it in your phone and getting it to you quickly, that's what lets us do it. Now we're recording this in 2024, in the first half of 2024. AI is growing in prevalence, or particularly LLMs. There's lots of branches of AI. As AI improves, the ability of it to grab and parse content quickly will allow for similar approaches. And we do see, as an alternative to what Brain Bump does, there are people saying we're loading in, I've got 20 books I've written, we're going to load that all into an AI model, and now you can talk to me because I've trained it with the books. It's not clear if people prefer that versus I just want to get the direct quote and let me drive what I want. I think that that case of the AI might matter where you're not familiar with the content. Saying, I just want to talk to this expert. I don't have time to even read her books. But when you've engaged with the content, you're trying to do the recall. I think that's where this type of model works better.
I agree. I think so too. Are there any upcoming projects or books that you're working on that you're particularly excited about?
Well, Brain Bump, much like a book, it's at least 3 years to promote it. So we're just getting started. We just put out the 2.0 version a few months before this recording. By the time this comes out, it will probably be closer to a year old. But we continue to evolve it and add more functionality, and it's all free. But I have a project that just came out. I mentioned I went on a lot of podcasts. Dory Clark said go on at least 150. At the time of this recording, I've been on over 400.
Whew.
I learned a lot. I learned how to pitch podcasts, how to be a good guest. I learned things hosts do that are good or not good, how to get the most out of a podcast, where to find podcasts. I had all this advice. I was sharing it with friends. So I put that all up in a series of articles called Podcast Alchemy. And it got bigger than I expected. What I might do, not committing to this yet, but maybe, this is pretty much a book. And so I might add a little more, some additional content that didn't go into that. And we'll put that all into a book that comes out. But we'll see when I have time, because I'm still promoting my book, The Career Toolkit. I've got my app, Brain Bump. I have my day job building tech companies. We'll see if we have time for this.
What's free time anymore anyway? Like, who needs it? Oh my gosh. You do have a few things going on. And I love that whole idea of providing tips and tricks to podcast guests, because there are few of them and far between, but they're the ones that are memorable, that make you go, I wish I could have told him XYZ before showing up. And I do my best. Like, as a host, I do my best to have you completely informed from the time you schedule to the time you receive your media package in the end. But I just started last week putting tips on TikTok. I was like, if you're new to being a guest on a podcast, because I've had some doozies that, oh my goodness. So I think because that's the world we live in now, everybody's on a podcast, everybody's hosting a podcast. So I could see that being very beneficial. So by all means, if you do that, send it my way, please.
Absolutely. Well, we can send the links to the article so you can put in the show notes for everyone.
Yeah.
And then we'll see if we do the extended version that becomes a book.
That sounds like a great idea. All right, we are to the point of the show where we're going to flip the script. And so I am no longer the host of Connected Conversations for Creatives. You are. So take it away, Mark.
You asked me how I was marketing my book. You mentioned your book has been out. What approaches are you using to market your book?
So like you, I started with, it was my Facebook friends, like it was my personal Facebook page. And, I probably, when I say I had 700 friends, I had 700 Facebook acquaintances, like they weren't the people that are going to all flock and buy my book, right? They're people that I have a couple of people I went to middle school with that's the only time I ever saw them, and never again. So, that's not really my target market, but that's where I started. And then I stayed on Facebook, because that's a very different demographic than the ones you find on Instagram, which is different from the ones on TikTok. But that's social media was where I started. I will say that TikTok, even though I'm a geriatric millennial and I probably shouldn't be on TikTok, that is where my biggest platform is right now. And so, which I love, it's creative in a way that I'm not normally creative. And so definitely social media. And then as I've gone through the process, because my book was published in 2022, my first book came out in 2022, and I've done 3 so far, and I have another one coming in October. I'm starting to get the hang of like BookBub ads and growing a newsletter and branching out and getting myself on podcasts and not just hosting, which I don't love being a guest on podcasts, because it makes me sometimes I feel inferior and sometimes I feel like I've wasted my time. And I hate to say that, but that's why I'm behind the mic, because I really like being in control of things. And so, which probably speaks volumes of my personality, but this is where we are. So that's kind of where I've spent most of my time, is just social media, which has been very surprisingly fun, even though it's kind of a love-hate because it's also a very big time suck.
And for anyone who's listening to you for the first time, can you just give us a quick summary? What's your book title and what is it about?
Okay, so I will talk about my current series that I'm working on. I write in two different genres, eventually probably three, but right now I'm in two genres. I have a Christian fiction series that I started with, and now I'm in a new adult contemporary romance series that I adore, and I can't get away from my characters, which is where it all started. But so the book that came out in February 2024 is called Fall When You're Ready, and it was going to be a standalone. I heard a country song. The two main characters said, "Hey, this is our song, now write our story." So I started writing their story. They met in kindergarten, they grew up together, the best friends kind of started to have feelings for each other, and next thing you know, they're going to junior prom together, and confessions of love are made, and they make plans for the future. And then the future kind of starts to slowly fall apart for them, and life takes them in two different directions, and it's, they both find success exactly following their dreams and where they thought they wanted to go, but they always thought they'd get there together. And then it's like, oh, okay, this is everything I ever wanted, but is it enough? And so they're brought back together where it all began, and they have to decide if they can work through life, and the past, that broken promises and that kind of thing. And so it's childhood, best friends, fall in love, and hopefully they get a second chance. And it all revolves around a country music reality television show.
That is a unique premise. Now, let me shift gears and ask, we briefly talked about AI as a fiction writer. How do you look at AI? What do you see in terms of threats and opportunities? How is it going to change the landscape of fiction writing?
I love this question because I'm probably on the outskirts of popularity when it comes to my answer. I embrace it. I use it. It is a fantastic tool. I was having this conversation an hour and a half ago. I got really passionate about it. I'll try to hone myself, like wrote myself in here, but there is nothing wrong with using it as a tool. And I've said this several times before, actually, that your art is original to you, but it was influenced by somebody. And that's what AI does, right? Like it's influenced by other people's work, but it's not going to give you somebody else's work for you to claim as your own. Also, you can tell when AI has written something. And so it takes that human element out. It does not matter how many times you say, please make it sound like a human. It can't. Trust me, I've tried. I'm like, what would a human say in this situation? And they give me an answer 14 different ways, and none of it sounds remotely human. So you still have to put your touch on it, even in the end. So I think AI is fantastic. I think that it can get you through some creative ruts. I use a program called AutoCrit, like Autocritic, and it actually, you upload your manuscript and you can take it to a certain point in your chapter, and it will let you set, okay, what could happen next if the mood was this, and if and then it gives you a subplot of the mood, like if you're happy excited or happy surprised or whatever, and then it's like, this could happen next in your story. Sometimes there's aliens and cowboys involved, and that's not what you're writing, but you can still see the feel of the story that you might could go with. It's not perfect, but that's where the human element comes into play. So I love AI, and I use it all the time.
Well, I know you like to be in control, so I will turn the mic back over to you.
All right. Well, thanks for hosting. That was fantastic. Those are great questions, because I usually get the same questions, and those were different. So thanks. So Mark, how can listeners connect with you?
I'm going to give you 3 different websites. The big one, what we've talked about, is for Brain Bump. Now, the Brain Bump app is completely free. You can find it on both app stores, but you can also go to brainbumpapp.com. And at brainbumpapp.com, you can follow the links to the stores. There's a 90-second video showing how the app works, whole FAQ section, and for creatives who want to put their content, books, blogs, podcasts, classes, or talks on the platform, there's a link at the bottom. You fill out a 30-second form, tell us who you are, give us your URL so we can look at you, and we'll be in touch. So that is brainbumpapp.com. My own book, just for those curious, the careertoolkitbook.com. And so on that site, you can learn more about the book. You can see, for example, I have my blog, because it's chronologically ordered, you can also sort by topic. And so there's a simple example of how you can get into this nonlinear approach. By default, sure, it's linear like all blogs, but you can go to just the leadership tips, just the networking tips, and you can build something like that on your own site. So that's the careertoolkitbook.com. And a third site, I mentioned Podcast Alchemy and all my advice on podcasting. This is on a website, Cognosco Media, COGNOSCO media.com. If you go to cognoscomedia.com, you can read some of my blog posts talking about topics we covered, the future of media, this convergence of the different channels, and my thoughts on other areas. But there's a whole subsection, Podcast Alchemy. It's even a menu item up top. And if you go to the Podcast Alchemy, you'll see the articles on how to get on podcasts, how to host podcasts, how to get the most out of it. So that's Cognosco Media. And the other two websites, the careertoolkitbook.com and brainbumpapp.com.
That's fantastic. And it's going in the show notes, so it will be as easy as clicking a button if you can make it over to the show notes. And Mark, I have one big question left for you. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
All right. What is one piece of advice or encouragement you want someone to walk away with if they hear nothing else?
It is a marathon, not a sprint. Overnight success happens because there were 1,000 overnights before that led up to that one moment. Just keep moving forward. Some days you'll have some, wow, this is fantastic. That's who I needed to meet, some success. Other days will feel like you're treading water or even moving backwards. But you have to put in all that work because overnight success is years in the making.
That's fantastic advice, and that is the perfect way to end this because, yes, 100%, everything he just said, if you hear nothing else, walk away with that because you don't, and you don't see the failures, you don't see the stress, and you don't see each gray hair forming, but it's happening. All you see is the lights and the shining and the smiling and, oh, listen. Trust me, there's so much more to it. So that is fantastic advice. Mark, thank you for being here and for having this conversation. I know that if you leave not hearing something useful, that's on you, not us.